Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Thank you very much for deciding to spend the next 50 minutes with us. I want to let you know that we're recording this webinar. We have a very exciting agenda ahead. If you hadn't heard me say already, my name is Robert Simpson. I'm the Vice President for Corporater UK, and for the next 50 minutes, I will be your MC. For those of you who don't know Corporater, we're a software business that provides a platform from which we've built governance, performance, risk, and compliance solutions. These solutions can be configured to meet the specific needs of our clients. Let me introduce our esteemed speakers. The first person you'll hear from after I stop talking is Michael Rasmussen. Michael is an internationally recognized pundit on governance, risk, management, and compliance. Michael helps organizations improve GRC processes and choose technologies that are effective, efficient, and agile. Michael was a president and top-ranked analyst at Forrester Research. Michael is also a practitioner, so he's practiced what he's preached, which is good to hear, having managed the compliance and risk functions within organizations. Mark Limpkin heads up Corporator's UK consulting practice and is responsible for overseeing the successful delivery of all UK client solution engagements. Mark almost single-handedly built Corporator's SMCR solution. Mark is respected by our clients for his refreshingly direct and pragmatic approach to challenges posed by SMCR, and that's a diplomatic way of saying that Mark is a very direct character. It's been almost a year since the regime was extended to approximately 47,000 solo regulated firms. Many of you attending today represent these organizations. Some of you would advise them. A year ago, as you looked out your office windows, yes, remember those things, officers, and contemplated the challenges ahead, the reality was most of them were foreseeable, perhaps difficult, but certainly foreseeable. And you could draw on the experience of banks and insurance companies that had gone before you. Confidence that the rollout would be relatively trouble-free based on the conversations we were having with our clients and prospective clients was really quite high. And then came COVID. The way the story should have played out from that point onwards is that such a complex change program as SMCR should have ground to a complete halt, hence the reference to Quagmire. The remarkable thing is that didn't happen. What did happen is that organizations, by and large, plowed on. It wasn't easy, nor were the decisions that were made always optimal. For most of those organizations we speak to, it's been the last 12 months or so have been a bit of a slog. Hence as I said, the reference to Quagmire in the title of this event. The word quag is in fact Old English for bog, and mire is Old Norse for bad, and it can trace its origins back to the late 16th century. It has two meanings. The one I think that fits best for this event is a difficult, complicated, or unpleasant situation which is not easy to avoid or escape from. The escape part is important here, and this is where both Michael and Mark come in. And they will be showing how we can learn from our recent experiences and respond by doing things more optimally second time around. And I think this has relevance for those who are perhaps looking to extend the regime within the UK, or working on that currently, and those who are charged with implementing an individual accountability regime in a country outside the UK. What you're seeing here in this next image is the same patch of ground that you saw on the previous slide, although it's 100 years on. It's almost, and I think the point here is it's almost unrecognizable. And to me, it suggests that while transformational change is possible, The signs of what have gone before remain, and if you look closely, you'll see those signs in the outline of the trenches and the shell holes on the image. It can trap us and suck us in, like the quagmire that we saw in the previous slide, or we can learn from it and make better decisions and then escape from that. And now I will turn the presentation over to Michael Rasmussen.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Michael Rasmussen of GRC 2020 Research, and my job is to understand and research what the challenges that organizations are facing in context of governance, risk management, and compliance, and how they go about solving those challenges with strategy, process, and technology. And so I cover industries and requirements around the world. About half my time actually is spent in the United Kingdom, as far as on the phone or in person. When there's no pandemic, I'm over in London about 8 to 10 times a year. You know, SMCR has been something that's been on my radar for the last 4 years now, and something that I've been interacting with a lot of organizations on, but also in other jurisdictions as it goes around the world. I mean, I've had a number of discussions with U.S. firms that have to respond to SMCR because they have operations in the United Kingdom. But I've also been following the other similar accountability regimes in Australia with the BEAR regulation, Banking Executive Accountability Regulation, Ireland's SEER regulation, Senior Executive Accountability Regulation, Hong Kong's Managers in Charge regulation, and now the Singapore one with the on the individual and general individual and conduct rules there in Singapore. And so lots and lots are happening. You know, today's financial services organization, or any organization for that matter, has to navigate a lot of chaos. I wrote a paper specifically on this topic that was published in the Institute of Risk Management in London in their Enterprise Risk magazine a year ago. You know, that business is changing minute by minute, second by second. Senior management functions evolve and change, employees change, certification staff change, business processes, strategy, execution change, regulations change, risk change. Business is a lot of chaos. Even out before the pandemic, I mean, that's when I wrote this paper. You know, there's a lot of chaos happening in business because there's constant change, and we have to keep up with that change. The physicist Fritjof Capra stated, "The more we study the major problems of our time, the more we come to realize that they cannot be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they are interconnected and interdependent." The physicist here was talking about ecosystems, and it applies so well to business today that we have to see the interconnectedness of risks and compliance and individual responsibilities and accountabilities and be able to map and see the big picture of all this. We have to, in my workshops that I do in London, I often talk about this being able to see the forest as well as the trees. You know, we need to be able to see those individual risks like the trees as well as the forest, the interconnectedness of risks. And I've had a couple of large banks reply to me that it's a good analogy, but it's actually that in their environments, they have to see the leaf and the branch on the tree. A lot of the details out there become extremely important. And today's interconnected risk environment means that we have to have a broader perspective on risk and compliance, but also greater accountability for risk, compliance, and control from the top of the organization. So we see a lot of compliance and transition to greater accountability. You see this right now with the UK Senior Managers and Certification regime. You see it with the other regimes I've mentioned around the world. You also see the regulators cracking down and want greater defensibility and audit trail and system of records. That a lot of times manual processes with documents, spreadsheets, and emails do not pass the regulatory exam. They want stronger records and of who was communicated what policy or conduct rules on what date and time. Did they take the training? You know, what issues were managed? How were they resolved? How were they reported? And documents, spreadsheets, and emails don't give you a strong defensible audit trail. We'll talk more about that in a second. So we see a pass from, I would say that there was responsibility for like compliance and risk areas and controls functions to a future of greater accountability. And I'll talk about that difference between responsibility and accountability in just a couple slides. But the accountability regulations, like UK SMCR, I've likened to Tolkien, Tolkien's One Ring in Lord of the Rings. Now, I'm a huge J.R. fan. I've got a whole bookshelf full of Tolkien books and things behind me here, and I've done a lot of reading and studying in Tolkien's mythology. And in Tolkien's world, you had the one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. To me, the accountability regulations are like Tolkien's one ring. Instead of a ring, though, it's a regulation. It's the one regulation to rule them all, one regulation to find them, such as risk, compliance, control, accountabilities, and one regulation to bring them all, and in the enforcement bind them. To me, these accountability regulations are the Uber regulations. They put teeth in more, or in some cases, more teeth and all the other regulations and requirements facing the organization, because it puts accountability on senior management functions for risk, compliance, control areas, and that's significant. So let's talk about the difference between accountability versus responsibility. There's a subtle but very powerful difference. And the way I define this is that accountability involves something that you cannot outsource or delegate. While responsibility, I can delegate responsibilities. I can outsource responsibilities. If I'm responsible for something, I can give that responsibility to somebody else. But with accountability, to use the US phrase, the buck stops here. I own that. I cannot outsource or delegate my accountability. So before, it seemed like a lot of compliance and risk functions you could sort of play hot potato with, because you can shift the responsibility onto other people. With accountability, you can't do that. You own that, and you've got to be not just responsible for it, but you're accountable for it to see it through. And if there's issues, your job is on the line. And in the case of UK SMCR, your bank account's on the line as for potential personal fine, or if there's willful misconduct, potentially going to jail. There is a difference between accountability versus responsibility. And that's where I see this shift happening right now with these accountability regulations, is that it's moving from an era of responsibility and playing hot potato with that responsibility to an era of accountability where there's a defined person that's accountable, that owns that and can't delegate that ownership, that accountability. To me, it's like your morning breakfast. If you had your traditional British breakfast over there in the UK this morning, I mean, you had your the bacon and the eggs, and in that context, well, of course, we can throw in the beans and the tomato and the mushrooms and everything else, but we're talking about the bacon and the eggs. The chicken is responsible for your breakfast. The chicken has some type of interest in your breakfast, but the pig is committed and accountable. There's a different level of commitment that the pig brings to the table than what the chicken brings. And to me, the past was like the chicken, providing the egg. Now with UK SMCR, to me, this is very much like the pig. It has a very deeper level of commitment to your morning breakfast, so in a level of accountability. To me, when I look at the UK SMCR, it's also about integrity of the organization. That what the organization holds up as its values, its ethics, its conduct, its compliance to regulations, to how it manages risk and its interactions with customers and treatment of customers and their finances and information, that's a reality in the organization. We've seen a lot of conduct issues around the world, and it comes back to a lack of integrity in some of these organizations. That what they communicate in policies and conduct rules is not a reality in the organization. And to me, at the heart of what the UK SMCR is trying to achieve is integrity in financial services organizations. That there's somebody that's accountable, that's going to see that things are being managed properly in the organization. So let's break apart the different elements of the UK SMCR. You have the senior managers in what we call the senior managers regime, that we define senior management functions. These are executive roles, non-executive directors, certain levels of GRC, lines of defense and control roles. The senior managers can be held accountable for misconduct that falls within their area of responsibility. If it's willful misconduct, they could go to jail for up to 7 years. If it's negligence or lack of due diligence in certain areas, they can be personally fined. The objective is to provide accountability to a narrower group of senior management functions, these individuals, than the previously approved persons regime. And in this context, with the senior management functions, you have to define those senior management functions, allocate accountabilities, provide statements of responsibilities, seek different types of regulatory pre-approval, go through different compliance and certification elements so that there's proper fitness and proprietary of the individuals, define responsibilities and accountabilities and building out that responsibilities map. Those are the senior management functions. Below them, of course, you also have the the certification regime on certified persons, and in those areas, you have to certify the individuals and make sure that there's a fitness and proprietary of those individuals through criminal record checks and looking at references and being able to provide annual certifications on those individuals and record keeping and so forth. And then at the bottom, and I've got this on the next slide too that I'll go into in a second, but then you've got everybody else in the organization except for ancillary elements. So right now, this slide is looking at the senior management functions, but also the certification regime, the individuals that are material risk takers, the significant management responsibilities, customer-facing roles, and line managers of the certified people. And those are the ones that you have to be able to certify and provide fitness and proprietary and reporting on. Now, the scope of accountability, to me, are these three levels that I was just talking about. And technically, there's four because you have ancillary staff, but you don't have to do things as ancillary staff, so I don't include them here. You have the senior management, where you have to have pre-approved that are pre-approved by the regulators and subject to the fit and proprietary. I'm all tongue-tied. The fit and proper assessment by the firm that is done annually. They're subject to a set of conduct rules that have to be communicated to them, and they have to attest to that. You have to have clear statements of responsibilities that are defined responsibility maps, and provide criminal record checks and regulatory references. Then you got the certification employees, which are those are the individuals in the firm that are material risk takers and significant types of management functions, people that are dealing with clients in every day, those type of roles. And to them, you've got to have annual certification as fit and proper by the firm, certification regime overseen by the senior manager, and provide regulatory reference, and they're subject to conduct rules. And then you have everybody else in the organization. And in that context, they're subject to the conduct rules, and you've got to, and except for ancillary staff such as caterers and receptionists out there. And in that context, everybody else in the organization has to read and attest to conduct rules and be trained on them properly. Now, one of the things I'm seeing out there right now in the United Kingdom is that we've been dealing with the first two levels for the past couple of years now. And then we had a deadline in December, just a few weeks away, that was pushed out to March now, that all other staff have to read and attest the conduct rules. Now, that's significant right now in the fact that being able to communicate conduct rules, which are policies, and gather attestation and show training and awareness to all the other staff, opens up the touch points of UK SMCR to a lot more individuals in the organization, which means a lot more paper trails and tracking things and time spent on this. So I see a lot of organizations starting to turn to how do we manage this with technology in our environment to make things more efficient, effective, and agile, which we'll talk about. But we have to clearly define the management responsibilities, statements, and map. We need to have a statement of responsibilities that record the relevant prescribed responsibilities for the summary of these on the responsibility maps, such as management and governance arrangements, senior management and their individual responsibilities and their senior management functions, reporting lines, the allocation of responsibilities, and how management and governance arrangements fit within the group. And then we have the conduct rules themselves. You've got senior management conduct rules, so that you must take reasonable steps to ensure that the business of the firm for which you are responsible is controlled effectively. You must take reasonable steps to ensure that the business of the firm for which you are responsible complies with the relevant requirements and standards of the regulatory system. You must take reasonable steps to ensure that any delegation of your responsibilities to an appropriate person and that you oversee this effectively. And again, here this illustrates my point. You can outsource and delegate responsibility, which this is acknowledging here, but at the end of the day, you're still accountable, that you have to oversee that. And so it's about accountability. And then you must disclose appropriately any information of which the FCA or PRA would reasonably expect notice. And so those are senior management specific conduct rules. To me, a conduct rule is a policy. These get defined in a policy, and it gets communicated out to these senior management functions, and they've got to attest to it, be trained and acknowledged on it. But then you have the individual conduct rules that goes out to the broader set of employees, of course, except ancillary staff, in which the conduct rules state that you must act with integrity, you must act with due skill, care, and diligence, you must be open and cooperative with the FCA, the PRA, and other regulators, you must pay due regard to the interests of customers and treat them fairly, and you must observe proper standards of market conduct. Now, you have exposure if misconduct was deliberate, such as willful misconduct, and senior management functions could potentially go to jail for up to 7 years for willful misconduct and violations. Or there's exposure if the standard of conduct was below that which would be reasonable. And that's significant there because it means that you've got to be crossing your T's and dotting your I's correctly and show that there's proper due diligence to address these different areas of responsibility in the organization. But as I said, it's not just the United Kingdom anymore with SMCR. You've got Ireland's SEER regulation, Senior Executive Accountability Regulation. You got Hong Kong's Managers in Charge regulations, Australia's BEAR regulation, the Banking Executive Accountability Regulation, and now Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, has their individual and conduct rules out there as well now that have to be followed. And so we're seeing a focus on accountability go around the world in other regulators. But it's also interesting because, I've talked to firms that are headquartered in France, or here in the United States, or even in South Africa, that have to respond to the UK SMCR because they're not headquartered in the United Kingdom, but they've got operations in the United Kingdom. And in order to operate in the United Kingdom, you've got to address SMCR. And so, I've had firms like one that's headquartered in Chicago, that's an hour and a half south of me where I live. Large global financial services firm that has significant operations in the United Kingdom, and as a result, talking to a lot of their people in Chicago is how do we address UK SMCR? And I've had this conversation around the world because it has a global impact. Now, from my perspective, the inevitability of failure in trying to manage a compliance requirement like UK SMCR is trying to manage this in documents, spreadsheets, and emails. This is, to me, a recipe for disaster. It's the inevitability of failure, because at the end of the day, you're going to have hundreds to thousands of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. It takes a massive amount of time to report on this type of information and to consolidate that. And you're going to find staff are just buried in trying to go through different types of attestations from conduct rules and compile reports, report to regulators. It takes a lot of time. And at the end of the day, documents, spreadsheets, and emails don't have a strong system of record or audit trail. I can manufacture evidence of compliance documents, spreadsheets, and emails, and users are wising up and catching on to this. And they want to see a strong system of record, audit trail, and a level of accountability that goes beyond what you can get just with documents, spreadsheets, and emails. Who was communicated what conduct rule on what day and time? Did they attest to that? Did they take the training? What responsibilities were defined for that senior management function? How were they carried out and fulfilled? What assessments were done? How was that communicated? When that issue happened, who managed it? How was it reported? Who followed up on that? And it requires a level of an audit trail and system of record that you just cannot get in documents, spreadsheets, and emails. And so you might use manual process documents, spreadsheets, and emails as sort of a stopgap to get started. But over time, you're going to find that it's inefficient and it doesn't hold up to a significant level of scrutiny. And so we need to take a top-down approach and define what is our UK SMCR management strategy. How are we going to approach this? How are we going to, who's ultimately responsible for the different areas of compliance and being able to manage the requirements of UK SMCR? What's the overall process? And this is significant because this isn't just a, we comply once and then we can put it aside. Yeah, your business is changing. Senior management functions are changing. Employees come in, even senior management function levels and non-executive directors, and they leave the organization. Not only that, the certification staff and all the other employees change. And there's a requirement for annual attestation and communication of conduct rules to these different functions at these 3 levels of senior management functions, to the certification staff, as well as all of the employees in the organization except for ancillary staff. This isn't a comply once and forget about it. It's something that happens on a continuous basis, and particularly also an annual basis as far as the communication of conduct rules and the attestation there, and getting the certification reporting to the FCA and PRA of the senior management functions and certification staff approvals. And so you need to find processes to manage this. From there, this then requires that we have strong information technology to be able to deliver on this in the organization. Technology for UK SMCR provides strong management reporting. Some firms I've talked to find that 80% of their compliance staff is nothing more than document reconcilers because they're trying to manage hundreds to thousands of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. And they want to flip that on its head, where only 20% of their time is reconciling information for reporting, and 80% is actually managing, improving, and compliance. I talked to another firm for compliance was spending 200 hours to build a report. Because that's like one employee with 5 weeks of time because they're combing through all the different documents, spreadsheets, and emails. And now it takes them less than 5 minutes because they've automated that with technology. We need clear management reporting. Technology delivers strong reporting so that you don't have to manage hundreds of thousands of documents, spreadsheets, and emails. It provides a strong audit trail and system of record to be able to defend the organization and show what tasks were completed, who completed it, who read those conduct rules, when they read those conduct rules, when they attested to it, how are they trained on those conduct rules, and be able to provide that integrated environment and system of record that's defensible. Technology provides strong workflow and tasks, so things don't slip through the cracks. And when somebody's behind on their attestations of conduct rules and things like that, or fit and proper assessments or certification, background checks, whatever it might be, that there's reminders of those tasks that they need to get completed, that the deadline's nearing, or maybe escalation to certain management levels and things like that, that person didn't complete that attestation of the conduct rule and needs to do that. And so there's workflow and tasks and collaboration and monitoring of enforcement in the environment. Strong technology can integrate with HR systems to be able to pick up new employees or change roles and responsibilities, provide visibility and global reach as organizations operate across the world, and different parts of the organization have to be able to report in the United Kingdom and to the regulators there, and greater availability. Good technology provides strong accountability, automation, a single repository for all the information for compliance to UK SMCR, and a consistent framework in that approach. But at the heart of all this becomes a defensible system of record and audit trail. What conduct rule was communicated on what date and time? Did employees have questions? How are they reported? Do they report issues? How are they responded to? What was the context and sequence of events of how we are compliant to UK's SMCR and conducted our fit and proper assessments and annual certifications and record keeping requirements and so forth? Are there different types of exceptions that were documented and that needed a proper approval and monitoring? Do we meet the requirements? A lot of organizations I find that are turning to technology to get out of the quagmire of SMCR compliance is to be able to provide that strong system of record and audit trail that's needed here, but also in a way to make this more efficient, effective, and agile. Agile technology for compliance for UK SMCR and other compliance requirements means that it's highly usable. It's not overly complicated where only the back office of corporate compliance and ethics and HR and things can decipher it, but it's highly engaging to those senior management functions in the organization. It should have a low total cost of ownership where it's easy to implement and deploy in the organization and doesn't take years to roll out. It's highly configurable, scalable, adaptable in the organization. It provides the right analytics and is easy to deliver on upgrades. Good technology for UK SMCR is going to make things more efficient, where there's going to be time saved from manual processes, simplified and streamlined processes and reporting, reduction in reporting time, and reduced staff to manage compliance. Not only is good technology for UK SMCR going to make your compliance processes more efficient, it's also going to make them more effective, where there's less things slipping through the cracks, a stronger audit trail of everything that happens for a complete defensible system of record, and allows for easier conversations with senior management functions, certification staffs, and employees because there's better engagement on these areas in communication reporting. That effectiveness is interesting to me because I break it down into a couple different areas. That there's technology for UK SMCR to help you manage the requirements of SMCR itself, but there's also technology because of UK SMCR. Think about it. If you're that senior management function that's responsible for market conduct or money laundering or vendor risk or whatever it might be, you're going to want to make sure that if you're that senior management function responsible, or I should say accountable for that area, you're going to want to make sure that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's correctly. That your bank account's on the line, your personal bank account in this context, and so at the end of the day, you're going to make sure that that area of accountability that you have accountability for, is being managed properly. So there's technology for UK SMCR, but there's also technology because of UK SMCR, and some solutions like our host today, Corporater, delivers on both. And so that means greater effectiveness in being able to engage those senior management functions and certification staff and employees. So good technology for UK SMCR makes it more efficient, effective, but also it makes it more agile, where there's ease of configuration to adapt to a changing regulatory and risk environment. Risk managed as roles and tasks change and evolve, streamlined agility and business change, such as mergers and acquisitions, and being able to merge senior management functions and things because of an acquisition or merger, and quickly identify needs of new employees, roles, responsibilities, and tasks. So how do we move along the journey of accountability compliance? It's critical to plan your compliance journey by laying out your route ahead of time. Where are you at today? I mean, for many of you on the phone or on the web, you're just approaching this now. Maybe you're one of the solo regulated firms that's just starting to come under UK SMCR. Others, you've been doing this for a few years now, but there's new requirements like, communication of the conduct rules to all employees except for ancillary staff that you face. But whether you're new to this or you're just or you've been doing it for a few years, it's understanding how are we approaching this right now, or how do we plan to approach that? But where do we want to be? What's the best approach to be able to make UK SMCR sustainable in the organization, where it has minimal impact on our employees and our financial and human capital resources as far as time and money, and that it's effective, that we have the right audit trails and system of record and workflows and tasks and communications, but also is agile in a dynamic and changing business environment. And from there, what's the right equipment for the compliance journey? I mean, you don't want to climb up a mountain and find out that you only have enough equipment to get you halfway. That's not going to help you. I see a lot of organizations approaching this because they're not thinking big picture for UK SMCR. They're looking at something like the conduct rules communications and thinking, oh, I need like a policy management system to be able to communicate and track the attestations and provide system of record on the communication of conduct rules. And they're not really thinking through all the fit and proper assessments and background checks and certification and workflow and tasks and reporting that is needed as well. And so do you have the right technology that can see you through to the end of that journey that you're on with UK SMCR that can address all these different areas? That technology can not only address the requirements of UK SMCR itself, But the element that I said, because of UK SMCR, that you can provide the right dashboards and insight to those senior management functions where they can track their responsibilities and accountabilities, whether it's money laundering, vendor risk, privacy, whatever it might be, and make sure that the organization is behaving itself there. And then you have to make sure that you understand the journey ahead of yourself. I mean, for the larger firms, this has come in stages. You know, a couple of years ago, like 2017, it was defining your senior management functions and communicating conduct rules. I mean, there's the requirement, you know, last year for the communication of conduct rules for the broader certification staff and being able to manage that. And now we've got that broader requirement coming up in March of 2021 that was just next month, but it was extended because of COVID, to communicate conduct rules to all employees except ancillary staff and track those attestations and training on those. You know, what's your compliance journey and how do you execute on that? But if you approach this right, you should have agile compliance. You have greater awareness of accountability and responsibility in your senior management functions and certification staff down to the employees themselves. Allow us to align our resources to make things more efficient in the organization and effective and agile, because we understand that we're aligned, we're responsive to issues, we can identify issues quickly, resolve them, report on them to the regulator, and which also makes us more agile in a dynamic business environment, particularly when there's mergers and acquisitions and significant risks that catch us off guard, like COVID-19, and how to respond to that, which makes us more resilient with a greater focus on operational resiliency, of course, and there needs to be a senior management function specifically for that, and then efficiency in our use of human and capital resources. So I think I've gone a little bit over my time, but I want to turn this back over to Robert and Corporator to go through how they're approaching this, and then we can move this over to questions.
Michael, thanks very much for a very insightful and comprehensive presentation. I'll turn it over now to Mark. What I would say is, we did say at the beginning that we were running for 50 minutes. If I can ask that those on the call can maybe hang on for maybe an additional 5 minutes, I think it'll be worth your time, and we can essentially get through certainly a good proportion of what Mark wants to cover. So without further hesitation, I'll hand it over to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think Michael's kindly covered off a lot of the aspects of the regime, which is very helpful to move straight into showing you how Corporator has really understood the regime through both initial engagement with clients early on during the process of implementation of SMCR, but also with the ongoing business as usual activity that we have with those clients. So I won't recap on some of the regime fundamentals, but just to highlight this first slide, just to highlight the areas of key functional considerations. So from the senior manager regimes, as Michael touched on, the statement of responsibilities, the management responsibilities map, the way in which you look to delegate responsibilities to others within the organisation whilst also still remaining accountable, the ability to demonstrate and record reasonable steps as a senior manager as part of your commitment to the regime itself. And it's worth also noting, not just doing this from a regulatory driven agenda, but also doing this from the way in which you can take this as an opportunity within the organisation to put in place potentially better rigour and control that may not currently exist, and certainly define better lines of responsibility and boundaries of responsibilities as well. On the certification side, again, just key aspects of digitalising this would be to the consideration of the initial fitness and proprietary assessment of an individual performing a potential role that could cause significant harm across a range of certified functions. The ability to then issue certificates, renew those certificates on an annual basis, and ensure that regular checks are being performed as part of that. And finally, on the conduct rules, a number of different dimensions with regard to conduct staff from a system perspective, whether that be from a breach management perspective, right through to a training and awareness and record keeping aspect as well. So these are just some of the key component parts to consider when looking at potential solutions within this space. I think the other key point to note as well is there's an element of regulatory prescribed aspects of the senior manager regime, in particular the senior management functions and the prescribed responsibilities. But there's also the balance on the other side around the firm the firm providing clarity around overall responsibilities as well as other responsibilities, and how the combination of prescribed, other and overall will come together as one senior manager regime framework, and also clarity around how that will be cascaded and allocated across your senior management functions and teams, and also where any of those aspects need to be shared, whether that be from a functional perspective within the organisation or whether that just be from a shared further clarification of that requirement. And finally, just on the process side of things, it's understanding how workflow from an SMCR perspective will fit in with your existing processes in the organisation, whether that be from talent acquisition right through to changing in roles and responsibilities across the organisation. So trying to embed SMCR as part of a business as usual set of processes and tailoring workflow that will support it within a solution. So Corporator's approach to address all of these aspects has really been from a functional perspective across a modular based approach from senior manager regime, certification regime, conduct module, and then a reasonable steps aspect. And from a system solution perspective, we have to consider things such as integration with underlying systems, whether that be HR, compliance, risk, finance systems, right through to then how we decide and understand how we will model workflow and process within the application, providing the necessary reports both internally and externally to the regulator, and also the management information and dashboarding capability that will help you understand where you are within your regime management. So I just want to turn to providing a brief flavour of what the application looks like, so you get a feel for how these component parts have been considered. So very conscious of time, so I will just highlight some of the key aspects that Michael referenced, where challenges may lie within implementation of the regime using technology, and just where the advantages can come from a technical approach to this. So the first is understanding and modelling the regime and administering the regime. So first of all, back to those senior management functions and prescribed responsibilities. Many firms we engage with have a multitude of firm types, whether that be from banks to insurers, enhanced firms, core firms, or a combination of any of those in conjunction. So it's understanding the regime and determining the regime context across those range of organisational types. And in turn, there may be multiples of each of these types as well. So this is just around managing the scope of the overarching regime from a firm type perspective, both senior management functions, prescribed responsibilities, as well as the overall and other responsibilities that we touched on before. Typically, overall responsibilities relate to your business area and management function activity across the firm, so much more contextualized to the day-to-day running of the organisation and those heads of departments and those that have overall responsibility for key aspects of delivering key services to clients. So these are the much more firm prescribed level responsibilities for you to determine that clearly the regulator is keen to understand how they're being dispersed. In conjunction with the regime setup is personnel, how personnel information comes into the system, whether that be through integration with an underlying HR system, or whether that be on a more immature environment whereby personnel records are managed in Excel spreadsheets or somewhat access databases that are less mature from a digital smaller firm size. So we do cater for both large international firms as well as some of the smaller firms that have not so much maturity, digital maturity in other aspects. So they're two of the key pillars, regime and personnel. The third pillar is your legal entity structure and understanding how you want to devise your legal entity structure, and not only the entities that are subject to the regime, but also the governance arrangements that reside within those individual structures, looking at everything from boards to committees and modelling that with respect to the terms of reference of those committees, which ultimately will feed into the management responsibilities map. So that's the first stage, is with respect to establishing and setting up the regime. As we move forward to operating the regime within the system, we need to have information such as dashboards that provide us with a holistic view as to the status of the allocation of senior management functions, prescribed responsibilities, other and overall responsibilities, as well as the certification functions, and have we captured all of the necessary parties that are impacted by those. So this is presented on an entity by entity basis, whether that's multiples of enhanced, multiples of insuring type firms. Each entity can tailor the scope of the regime accordingly, as not all responsibilities and SIMP roles will be applicable. So you're able to tailor further from the master list of roles and responsibilities we discussed a moment ago. Ultimately, we're looking to map and allocate roles and responsibilities to individuals, and by profiling those individuals accordingly, we're then able to trigger and activate workflow for them. A key strength of what Corporater provides is a workflow and tailored workflow capability, allowing you to determine the number of stages and tasks and steps you wish to walk through as part of an initial onboarding process for a senior manager, for example, as shown here. In this example here, there are 6 stages, from everything to briefing the senior manager, the initial fitness and proprietary, the pre-approval steps you need to go through, the review and FCA submission activity, the actual approval from the regulator, and then handover induction where appropriate. Each stage can be tailored appropriately, and each stage provides you the ability to drill down and record the evidence and the activity that's occurring within that, whether that be through attachments as evidence and system of record, or whether that be directly capturing that data within the system. Ultimately, the outcome would be that each individual is profiled, you're able to understand the allocation of roles and responsibilities to that individual in conjunction with the integrated data from your HR system. And ultimately, coming back to one of those key collateral documents, the Statement of Responsibilities, providing you the ability to both present a formatted FCA Statement of Responsibilities, or alternatively your customized format that allows you to internally manage and cascade across your senior management communities. So there's clarity around their roles, responsibilities, shared aspects of those as well. As we move back up to the entity level, what we will then find is we're able to start to look at the management responsibilities map. And this ultimately gives us the complete view of the legal entities subject to the regime. Here we're producing these within Word as an automated population with a combination of standard text of the organisation, and then moving into specifics that the system generate with regard to things such as organograms that show the relationships between senior managers under the regime, and then in turn each of the individuals and their associated roles and responsibilities. Right through to, as I said earlier on, the committee and board governance structures that also reside for this particular entity, including their terms of reference. So all of this is system generated, allowing you to take a forward or backward view of the organisation at any given point in time to understand the implication of the regime. Similarly with certification allowing you to map certified roles, tailored workflow for certification, again, different workflows for different processes within the system, but ultimately allowing you to issue out those certificates to certified staff on an annual basis, as well as the initial onboarding, providing them with validity dates so that you can then run that as part of the annual renewal. Just moving on to beyond the administration of the regime, and just to finish off really for today, to give you a flavour of this is very much around supporting teams within the HR, compliance, COSEC or dedicated SMCR teams that have been established within your organisation to administer the regime. But there is the end users of senior managers that can also benefit from this with respect to aligning their key business area of activity with the regime responsibilities themselves. And in this example here, we're choosing the example of, for example, the MLRO officer who's responsible for financial crime, anti-money laundering, customer due diligence, for example. And in this example here, we can see how we can present appropriate operational and strategic dashboards to those specific roles within the firm, so they're able to determine the state of play within their particular remit and how this aligns to their overall responsibilities under the regime, and also those that have been prescribed by the organisation for that particular role holder. Within here, they're able to understand from a governance perspective their risk profiles, the controls against certain risks and activities and processes within their functional areas, and the actions that are under governance within their particular area as well. Risk management, a key aspect of that overall management of a business function, and the ability to undertake full risk assessments, which at this stage I won't go into. So I really just hope that provided a bit of a flavour for how, at the administrative level, establishing the regime, meeting the regulatory obligations with regards to the management responsibilities map, statement responsibilities, the issuance of certificates to staff, and then subsequently how senior managers can have tailored dashboards and capabilities provided to them to ensure that they're able to record and evidence the reasonable steps they're taking as part of those extended senior manager conduct rules that Michael referred to earlier in his presentation. Thank you very much.
Mark, thank you, and thanks for doing it in relatively quick order and really covering, more than just SMCR, going beyond SMCR as well. I know we are over the allotted time. What I would suggest is if you want to find out more, you know where we are. Happy to hear from anyone to explore anything any further. We did have an allotted section and lots of sort of Q&A section. What I would suggest is that we obviously curtail that in the interest of time. I do have one question, which I think may be a question that others would have as well, and I'll put this to both Mark and Michael. And maybe Michael, you could start, and then Mark, you could give your perspective on it. But where, if you're in the middle of this now, and some are sort of further down the road than others, where do you and let's say you're considering technologies, you may have something in place, you may not. What are the key considerations that you should be thinking about at this point? Maybe Michael, if you could give your perspective, obviously briefly, and then Mark, you could add.
The key consideration, from my point of view, is how do we make this sustainable? Whether you're just entering this, like some of the solo regulated firms or the firms that have been dealing with this for a few years, this isn't going away, and it needs to be sustainable. And so, what's our current process and approach for addressing this today? What is it costing me in times of and resources like employee time and money involved to be able to address this aspect of compliance? And then how can we build out a strategy to make this more efficient, effective, and agile? And I strongly believe that technology can not only make things more efficient in our time and more efficient in our capital resources as well, but at the same time, it makes us more efficient. It can also make us more effective, accurate, complete, thorough, less things slipping through cracks, a greater ability to report and things like that. And also technology can make us more agile in being able to address a changing business environment, as well as changing risk and regulatory, changing employees and senior management functions, dealing mergers and acquisitions. So, you should take a close look at your current state, how you're addressing this, and what you can do strategically to change things to make things more efficient, effective, and agile. And technology, to me, is that critical answer that not only makes things more efficient, but at the same time makes them more effective and agile.
Thank you, Michael. Mark, from your perspective?
Yeah, just from my perspective, just to reiterate really that this is a business change program, not an IT-led project or an implementation. And in my experience, the best implementations have been those that are led by the business teams, and more importantly, the business teams that are going to run this from a business as usual perspective as well. So that sustainability element that Michael just referenced. So it's a big case of working with what you've got already. We have already predefined a number of out-of-the-box workflows, and my advice to clients typically is, if you haven't got those processes defined on paper, let's work backwards from what we already have out of the box and then tailor that to your organization. It is a journey that people do go on, so my advice is not to over projectize too much and try and get it right first time. I'm forever now seeing people wanting to introduce change as the regime has matured within their own organization, but also as their understanding of what's expected both internally and externally. So there is an initial element of ticking the initial boxes of getting it right. So there are obviously some regulatory obligations that need to be stuck to initially. So let's get those right. And again, technology should accelerate that. Again, it should be an accelerated process with regard to implementation, and I would suggest testing any vendor in this space to ensure that they can demonstrate the key requirements, but not only that, the room for growth and the extendability. So going beyond SMCR, not only from a functional point of view, but also from a regime point of view. Michael touched on a lot of those international regimes within the individual accountability space. So understanding how they can play a part moving forward. So it's a long-term view as to how technology will assist across the firm.
Okay. Again, thank you to Michael and Mark. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time. We're 10 minutes over, so it's 60 minutes rather than 50. So I hope you found it useful, insightful. If there's any further questions or interests, please come back to us would be delighted to speak with you. Thank you very much.